Okay, so I'm going to get started. My name is Paula Santos. I am the Senior Manager of Learning and Engagement at Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art in Chicago. I'm joined by Lindsay, who is our communications coordinator, and she's going to be helping me manage the more technical aspects of today. We are so happy to have all of you here to join us for our online program with George Widener. George will talk us through his process as an artist, his beginnings as an artist, and some of the things that he's thinking about currently. George, any first words for our for our audience?
Well, yeah, it's nice to give a talk at Intuit. I've never used this technology before, but it should be interesting, and it's amazing to see this happen and such. But I thought that I would. I don't have, as I told you, I don't have a prepared speech, but I did take a few notes, and I thought that I would talk briefly about my earliest days, a fascination with dates, and then sort of go forward from there to my 20s when these things started to come together, and which is 30. We're talking 1985, 1986, and 35 years ago. So nobody's the same 35 years later. And then to try to walk through some of the mechanical aspects of my art, and to try to talk a little bit about how that came about, maybe, and how I see it, or how I first saw it, and the aspects of how it came about, and today I can articulate. 35 years ago, I just did these things, for myself, and I didn't think about it, and I didn't think about it in the relationship of telling somebody else about it. I just did it, and at that time I was doing these things and such, and so it's a different thing to do something for yourself than it is to try and share that time with other people and stuff. So
Right.
Yeah, so I can talk about that. Yeah.
Great, George. So I think that most of us in this room, just seeing our guest list, is familiar with you or your work. But if there are some newcomers to your work, I'd love to begin with just a snippet of your bio. So George Widener was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, a self-taught artist and calendar savant. Widener creates mixed media works on paper that give aesthetic, visible form to complex calculations based on dates and historical events, the sinking of the Titanic being one of his favorites. The artist often uses found paper or a support composed of layers of tea-stained paper napkins. His drawings feature simple palettes, sophisticated patterning, and bold compositions of dates and imagery that transcend centuries of time and the history of art. So with that introduction, I'm going to start sharing the images, George, so you can walk us through some of the ideas you want to share with us.
Okay. Well, let's see. How about I think it'd be good to talk initially of I have been fascinated and intrigued with dates ever since my childhood, and at my grandmother's house in Kentucky, in rural Kentucky, and I was 6 years old. And I remember seeing the almanacs, farmer almanac, on her wall, and I would reach for it, and it was a game a bit to grab the calendar and run away with it and such. And so, yeah, my earliest days was that I can remember that I was always fascinated with dates, and I would. It was an alignment thing, I think, that it had to do something with the idea, the same idea of like a child lines up their toys. I think the dates were, it hit something in that area with me that that was a game and a fascinating thing for me. And then later on in school, I was drawing. It was discovered that I had a bit of a talent for drawing while I was at school, and that was good for me because it I got along well with the teachers, and they encouraged that. But it was just it was a memory thing for me, I think, in the same way that the dates were. I would make a list of dates at school, and I think that looking back on it, to talk about it, was that I knew, at this small school I was at in Kentucky, when I was like 9 or 10 years old, and I would make these lists, and I knew that listing these dates and playing with them, that it was something that I could do, and it gave me a good feeling about that. And I knew that I was the only kid at the school who could. The kids weren't interested, or didn't want nothing to do with it, but it was something that I could do, and I felt good about that. And it became like a private sort of enjoyment that I had and such. And and then it became important. I did okay in school. I did good in school mostly. As I got older, it was different from primary school. These things aren't the same. But I finished high school, and I graduated. I had a small scholarship. I was the only one in my family to finish high school. The others had gone to work and such. And I had finished, and I had a small scholarship to Vanderbilt University. But, I couldn't relate to that. And so I decided on my 18th birthday, I enlisted in the service. I joined up in the Air Force. And I went overseas, and I was in West Germany during the Cold War era. My dates and my drawing became less important during this time, but it came about as a series of circumstances, I think. I mean, looking back at it, I can articulate about this, but at the time, when you're young, you're doing these things, and you don't look back, or you don't think about it, but you just do things automatically. And I think what happened was I left the service in 1984. I had been overseas. I had seen there'd been some traumatic events, and I was very young. I was 19 years old, for example, over in Germany, and there'd been a car bombing. And by the way, I send my heart and thoughts to people over in Beirut, Lebanon. They had a terrible terrible accident over there. It looks like a industrial accident. It was a terrible thing that happened. But anyway, I experienced a car bombing and other accidents. I worked on the flight line with the camera systems that were in the U-2, the F-4 Phantom, and the SR-71 jets that would take these photographs. And there's accidents and explosions, and there was some fires. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't faze me. I did my duty and stuff. I was very young and everything. But anyway, I left the service in November 1984. And I had the idea I was going to be an engineer. You know, I liked machines, and I had been a technician, and so I was going to go to the University of Texas and study engineering. And I did. I started the classes, but for different reasons. I think it was. I think that you know, there was some delayed stress or something, and then my you know, my predisposition with dates, so to speak, that I began to have a lot of difficulties in 1985 and into 1986 with like anxiety and depression. And I was hanging on to my studies, but this thing that I had as a child, it became it started to come back to me and such. My calculation with dates, and looking back, I think it was sort of a defiance or a bit of a defense mechanism of sort. It was like, well, I'm having these difficulties, but you know, here's something that I can do and such. And you know, and that's where in 1986 I started to have a lot of problems, and I had a sort of I think it was somewhere between a hallucination or a flashback, perhaps. But they took me. I ended up in the hospital, in the Austin State Hospital, and of course, you know, in there it's a very strong environment place, you know, and so I started to shift. You know, I started to go to the things that I could do and stuff. It was sort of a lifeline for me and such. And that is when, you know, the more I began to somewhat isolate myself. Looking back, I could have gone to the VA, and they would have helped me, but I didn't want nothing to do with the federal government or the VA. You know, I stayed away for like 15 years because it gave me some bad memories and such that I hadn't worked through and stuff. It took me time, but my dates were something that I could do, and I started to keep notebooks and such. Never had the idea, of course, that eventually, you know, I saw myself as an engineer, an engineer to be, or a person that liked machines. And so that's where it got started in 1986, 1987. And I left the hospital, and I got a job, and I said, well, I'm gonna work a bit and stuff, you know. And I got a job at a bicycle shop. I remember that. And one day I saw I was working with the gears and the chain, you know, how it goes about. And it gave me an idea because, you know, as a child and up until then, I would see the dates like one at a time, you know, in my head. I could do that since a child. I could see the date one at a time, but I started to sort of build a system in the way that you build a machine. And I thought of an analogy that, watch horology, the study of timekeeping, the study of art of watches, watchmaking. It has some analogy to some of my thinking that I think that occurred. A watch has many different parts. It has spur gears, it has hands, wheels, balance, flywheel, the crystal, the case, the crown, and all of these things. They work together. The gears, you have anywhere from like 2 to 6 gears in a watch, and these parts have to work in perfect alignment with each other, or else you're going to lose time. And so I started to sort of build. In dates you have the four variables. You have a month, and which, because we're Earth time, we're just talking the 12 months. We're not on Mars, which is 37 minutes longer. But and then you have the days of the month, which is maximum of 31, and then you have the year values, and then you have the day of the week, which is again a possible of 7 values. And I started to go through I started at the beginning of a century, like January 1st, 1900. And I started to record these. I'd see them one at a time in my head. But I started to sort of build a machine that was a mechanical process, using this. And I think it's a good analogy in watches, that, for example, I'll give you an example, like a sort of a example of my gears, so to speak. If you're looking at, for example, the days of the month of possible of 31, well, if you're thinking like dates do, dates, they ebb and they flow, and like tides, and it's a natural process. And by the way, there's no coincidence that after the basic function of timekeeping in a watch, that they often instilled the first complications were the annual calendar and perpetual calendar with Abraham Breguet in the 18th century. That this was very popular, but because you can apply a mechanical process to dates. And so I tried to mechanize my dates thing that I could do, and I got a great deal of satisfaction out of this. I had become homeless. I was working, and I would work part-time jobs and such, but I was just obsessed with this. And I was going to the library. I'd make some money, and I'd stay at the shelter, and I'd go to the libraries and such. I was fortunate I didn't develop any drug or alcohol issues, and that sort of thing. But I just became obsessed about this and building this process. But as I was saying, like the days of the month, if you want to like see them as the calendars do, if you want to be in sync with the dates, I'll show you the process of what I do. And instead of counting, everybody, you can count to like serially. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And we do that automatically. We don't say 1 + 1 is 2, and 2 + 1 is 3, and 3 + 1 is 4, etc. You don't do that, even though you're doing that maybe on an inner conscious level. You're doing it very quickly, right? But dates, if you're in sync with the days of the month, you have to see them as the calendar does, and it's sort of a base 7 sort of program. And for example, I will count 1 through 31 as a calendar does. A calendar looks at it like 1, 8, 15, 22, 29, 2, 9, 16, 23, 30, 3, 10, 17, 24, 31, 4, 11, 18, 25, 32, 5, 12, 19, 26, 6, 13, 20, 27, and 7, 14, 21, 28. You see, I've gone through 1 through 31, but I did it in sequences of 7. Now that's one of my gears that I use. And the other gear is that I mesh that. Those are each, if you look at a single year and you're thinking about a particular day of the week of a particular year, you see, then you can use that as a reference, as a sort of a benchmark or a reference point. For example, if I looked at, I'll do just part of it for quickness. The year 1972, if I wanted to look at the Wednesdays, then I would know that the January 5, 12, 19, 26, February 2, 9, 16, 23, okay. I know all those Wednesdays of 1972, and then you can shift back and forth, and it becomes a mechanical process. You see, I can, based upon the one gear that has the days of the month, and then the other gear whereby I'm using a reference system to describe the year values, I can mesh those together, and then I can create this this sort of mechanical process for dates, and that's what I was working on for years, and that's what I did in my notebooks. In my works of art, it's often that I'm repeating this process. It was very fascinating to me, and it was a very good time actually creating these. I had my notebooks, and I was preoccupied with this, and you know, it was sort of my yeah, it was at a difficult time in my life. It was sort of a lifeline actually, and it was that's where my work got started. You know, what came to be called my artwork. That's where it started with the notebooks. And for example, in this notebook, it's for example where I'm starting at the beginning of the century, and I was just noting this, you know, January 1st, and then I go through and I was trying to find connections between all of these different the dates and the years, and it's an endless fascinating thing that I do, and it occurs. Some of the, you know, it's like how is it? Some of the things I do don't have any purpose with the dates, but you know, again, there's an analogy that I can tell you. One of the things in watches that was made by Abraham Louis Breguet, who was a 18th century watchmaker, he invented what's called the tourbillon in 1795, and this is there was a problem, like watches back then, it was mainly pocket watches, and he noticed that the pocket watch, you have it in your pocket, and it's in a vertical position, but you lay it on the table, then you're changing you see the position, the effects of gravity would affect the timekeeping. And he was thinking how to counter these effects of gravity. So he invented this part called the tourbillon, which in French means whirlwind. And it's basically an escapement and a balance wheel inside a rotating cage. And it counters the effects of the gravity such that the watch keeps better time due to the motion. Now, this was effective for pocket watches, but in the wristwatch, which came along a bit later and was more popular, it doesn't have as much of effect because your wrist naturally moves around, you see, as you walk and everything. It wasn't needed, but people love it in a wristwatch because they love to watch the gears. You know, they love to watch this mechanical wizardry of the tourbillon and such. I mean, it's a very expensive watch, but that's, you know, that's something that I do with dates. I love to see the gears turning and such. It fascinates me, you know, to find a particular process within the dates. And I make these dates with the idea. I love science fiction. I like saw Blade Runner in the 1980s and was fascinated with that, and Philip K. Dick. And so I got fascinated with this idea, you know, of futuristic and intelligent machines. And so I started playing around with this idea of making these entertainment devices for machines of the future. And for example, this CRISPR piece, on the left, you can see my number process of the dates, which is basically these reference years. You see, I can, the 00 at the top, if I declare the year 1972 as a base reference, and I declare it 00, then I can immediately click in the other gears of all the other I can use the other how you say, the imparted energy that goes into the other gears is in a watch. The difference in the difference in the other years of the calendar, you see. I mean, for example, the 60, well, that references the 1950, for example, or the 56. It's like 1973, you know. I mean, there's thousands of these, and I can reference them, and I can play along with these gear values, these mechanical that I invented and stuff that I created, and it allows me. But this is about gene sequencing, actually. CRISPR is the idea that in the future they'll be able to manipulate genes such that everybody is a lot healthier. And because that's why we get sick, because we have a predisposition for diabetes or something like that. And if you can take that out of your genes, then you'll be healthier. And so it's just the idea of sort of manipulating the genes, you know, to get rid of disease. And so I played around with that idea a bit, and simply with dates, I was simply counting through the years in a particular sequence and such, and creating a sort of mechanical representation of dates in an analogy, in a way that they manipulate the genes and such, you know.
George,
Yes,
George,
I'm
can I
sorry, I'm
interrupt you
going
for a
on.
second? No,
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you a question to maybe put this a little bit into context. So you've
sure.
talked a lot about the sequencing and how numbers are a huge part of your process, and you manipulate them and you can clearly see them. So so this is about your process, right? About making works of art. I wonder, for the people who look at your work, do you imagine them figuring out the numbers and the sequencing? Like, is this a work that can be read in the way that you have?
Well, I start with a basic idea, but then it evolves, you know, as I'm doing them and such, and I let it flow, you know, the numbers and the sequences and such, in some of my works. And in my early works, it was very, very much like that. For example, my what is it, the landscapes that I did, the megalopolises, I got those sequences in my dreams, and they're correct. You know, I mean, I was dreaming numbers and stuff, and it would come to me in dreams, or it would come to me suddenly, these sequences and such. But I do think of a general idea, but then I let it flow. You know, I let it flow, and I think that it could be a, you know, like it could be like an entertainment or a game for future machines and stuff. But you know, numbers are one thing that I do. I mean, as I'm evolving as an artist, I want to do some just drawing too. I mean, just like pure drawing that I can do, and try to be creative with that and such. Because I mean, I know a lot of my things are memory, sort of this memory thing going on and stuff. But I want to try to do other things. But you know, I'm what is categorized as a crossover. A crossover. Now, you know, this was like roughly what 1986 to 1995, 94. That I was doing these things absolutely for myself. I went into a voc rehab program in 95. They picked out a few art classes for me, drawing classes and stuff. So I was, at that time, I did see, you know, some drawing, but I still did my own thing, and privately too. I didn't share it with them because I'd had experiences, you know, when I was in the shelters of, I'd show people what I was doing with dates, and they thought, oh, you're crazy or something like that. And so it became very private up until, you know, 2004, 2005, when I had my first gallery experience and such, you know. But I'm sorry, what are you saying next? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't
So
mean to go on
I
and on.
No, no, of course. I
Yeah.
just I want to talk a little bit about these pieces right here. So Catch 22, there's two of them, and one of them currently or was at, it's still at Intuit, but it's part of the collection of Victor Keane, who is with us here today. And we had shown it, and it's really, really big. And one of the things that we had discussed before, George, is that when people look at a piece like this, and it's hard to see here in the image, but there's other dates, there's other
Yeah,
numbers, written
yeah.
around here. So
There's
my
small
question to you,
dates, and those are primarily those are dates that have to do with it's a sort of an autobiographical piece or a self-portrait piece, and this was a sing-song thing. The second. It became a sing-song thing in my mind that I did. Hun, could you turn the light? Right, she got the light, and it became a sing-song image in my head that I was having in my sleep and stuff. I'd wake up with this, and I got to thinking about doing a piece with this, and then it became a bit of a challenge to do one on the Titanic, and then to do one on me, the second, to have them add up in the same way and such. It's sort of a dual thing, between the two. Hey, hon, you want to
yeah.
say hi? Real quickly. It's Tang, my wife.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi,
Yeah.
Tang.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say about this is that when we had talked about your process before, and also when I read your bio, one of the things that comes up is the surfaces that you like to draw on or you like to write on. So, for example, this piece here, when you look at it in person, you start noticing that it's made up of a lot of smaller pieces that are glued together. So can you tell us a little bit about, why you decide to create such large works with these smaller pieces like collage together, and talk us through your process there?
Well, it came from my early days of when I was working with mainly small things, small pieces and such in my notebooks. And then if I wanted to make something larger, I would just glue them, paste them together and stuff. I didn't know about really art supplies in the beginning. I did encounter art supply stores in the 90s and such, but in the beginning, it was just if I wanted to make something larger than a page, I'd just glue them together and stuff. And yeah, it just came out from that really. And I like the process, and I like the texture and the feel of like the napkins and such. I used napkins in the 1980s as for practical reasons and such, because they were easy to get. And so I used them, and I like the texture of it and the feel of it. And I stuck with it and stuff. And I like old papers and old antique things and stuff. Yeah.
So I'm just going to move the slide because we have a question from Kathy Selman, and she's wondering in this piece right here, what is the significance of this sort of
Oh,
red
those are like,
line?
well, in the idea of gene sequencing, it's about the cells of the body, and this was sort of red blood cells as they're coursing through us. I was drawing that, yeah, and looking under a microscope and seeing the process of our body's kind of like a machine as well. The mechanical. It functions in a way as a machine. It was that's where it came from. Yeah, red blood cells.
So I know that when we have had conversations before, one of the things you bring up are magic circles, and here we have a couple of works that reference that. What are magic circles, and what are some of the thoughts you were having as you were making these two works here?
Well, again, in the 1980s and 1990s, I would play these games with dates, and I would see license plates, and I would convert them to dates, and I'd play a game with it. I would see house numbers, and I'd play a game with that. I saw a magic square, what's known as a magic square, a numerical magic square in the 1990s, and I converted it to dates. And then I realized, wow, here's a process that I can really enjoy and such. And so I started to create these magic time squares, which magic squares have a very long history in parts of Asia. They originated in like China a couple thousand years ago. The emperor saw a 3x3 pattern on the back of a turtle, and I think it was called the Lo Shu, and so it evolved in Asian culture. And it's associated with like sometimes good fortune, or what's going to happen in the future. And the Chinese, centuries ago, they tried to relate magic squares, numerical magic squares, for example, with the planets, and in order to make some sort of fortune telling and such. But what I did was made a hybrid of sorts of mixing dates into the idea of the magic square, and I made a sort of magic time square where I can form all sorts of patterns, and then I can connect those, if I wanted to, with historical events and such, and it becomes very complex. Like chess. Chess is. I don't play chess, but chess has 32 pieces on the board, and it very quickly becomes very complex, and that's why people love it. Because you're sort of going down this rabbit hole of all these possibilities and such. And from what I understand, the best chess players, they memorize huge amounts, but they also have an intuition that maybe can't be taught or something. But that's the fascination with chess, and so it is with me with these interaction of dates and magic squares, for example. I get to play with these, and again, I see them as sort of a game or an entertainment device for if you were able, I mean, if you're some sort of artificial intelligence and you're able to scan through these and sort of associate the events with the different dates, or perhaps you know what orbital information, or you know, star dates and this sort of thing with this. I mean, it goes on and on. You could play a very you know, infinite game, and if machines do become with more like human intelligence, where they're not just processing information but able to spot subtle patterns, then it will become fascinating perhaps for them. And that's what I'm doing with these. I'm the blackened areas are suggestions of choices. You know, you like assign different values to this, and then you the parts that are not blackened in are other values, and it becomes a challenge of sorts. You know, and see. I don't know. Maybe in the future, you know, that machine will be able to run through this in seconds. But I think it can be creative, you know, in ways that I can't imagine today. But that's what I like to think about these, you know, that as I manipulate the relationships of the different dates and the days of the week and these variables, you know, that it becomes this game of chess, so to speak. You know, for me, it was my personalized chess game that I've been able to play with, and that's what these are about. Really. And it's the background is dates, a range of dates that can be inserted into these, and that's what I'm playing with. It's somewhere between I love maps, you know. I collect old maps, and it's somewhere between a game and a map, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I definitely want to go back to maps. But Frank Maresca has a very intriguing question. And he asks, or he says, you've been interested in robot teaching games and artificial intelligence. Do you think robots will ever be able to do what you do?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, I believe that in the future that robots are gonna truly have artificial intelligence, and I don't know if it's going to be good or bad. A lot of scientists are thinking about this. You know, that we have to prepare for this now, and but they're going to mimic. They're going to reverse engineer the human brain, and then the machines, because of the nature of their process, they're going to quickly surpass us. But these will become a not only are they computational, but they can lend themselves to creativity, you know, and in the way that the machine will be able to interact with it, that no person today can do that. Maybe in the future, if people are enhanced in some way, that they could, because this is a dynamic system. This is not a static system. It's a dynamic system. You see, that's what I was trying to do with my mechanics. I can only see dates one at a time. I can't see a dozen dates at one time in my head, but I can make a mechanical process in order to play with the relationships of the different dates and to play a game with it. And that becomes creative for a machine that has, you know, a huge amount of memory and associative memory and this sort of thing. And, you know, for example, my robot teaching methods, you know, it's with the, like the letters. I was playing around with ciphers and keys. I think it was because when I was in the service, I was around like some top secret, photographs and such, and I saw some of this stuff when I was very young, 19 years old, and I kind of had that in my head, this idea of espionage and such, and but if you, for example, if I put in a cluster of dates in the, starting with ones and Mondays, it may be like, I wrote down a few here, like the 1st of May, 2124, the 1st of October, 2156, or the 1st of March, 2134. Now, what is that? Well, there's a subtle pattern there. They're ones and they're Mondays, you see. And then I could go on to create a subtle pattern of twos, starting with the Tuesdays, and then it becomes a subtle pattern that a machine, if it's scanning quickly and doing this quick computation, it will see that pattern, and it can associate those with the letters of the alphabet, A through Z, and then it creates a cipher of sorts and such. And that's what some of my when you see the letters of the alphabet, that I'm creating a sort of a calendar time-based cipher key and such that is quite a trick to, you could create quite a hidden message with that. And I think I think that the guy in that did the Voynich manuscript back in the Middle Ages, I think he was a monk that was on the spectrum and stuff that created some sort of, because they've analyzed that and they said, well, there's some sort of pattern there that's similar to language, but they can't crack it. And I think he was maybe calculating in some way. That's my personal thing. That manuscript that they can't crack, and stuff. But that was my thought on it. It may be the self-taught things that you see, that there's a version of it in the Middle Ages, but it was rare because people, it wasn't valued like it is today and such. They had different ideas about things.
Yeah, George, I have a question related to something you had said earlier about maps. So the work that I've definitely seen at Intuit, from Victor's collection, and even this piece right here, it references not only dates, but there's features of topography, right? So when you have all the dates together, you feel like it's like a landscape or some sort of land mass with dates. So can you talk a little bit about how you see mapping in your work, or and maybe in any of the slides that we have examples of where that mapping comes in?
Well, I think I'm doing sort of a calendrical version of mapping in my works, but I was fascinated because of my days. I had some strong experiences beginning in the 1980s when I was on the streets at times. I just got fed up with different things, and I was doing different jobs, and I'd make some money, and I said, well, heck with it. I'd fly over to Europe and stuff, and I'd land in a country with maybe $100 or something. And so I didn't have anybody I could call, and so I wasn't playing around a game or something, and so I ended up, in these situations overseas. You're not supposed to do that, but I was over there in Amsterdam one time, and I was collecting like scrap metal and stuff, and staying in this park and doing my notebooks, and it was great. It was a good time, but I lost my passport, and so I went to the embassy, and they said it was going to take weeks or to identify me. And then I went to this place where a church where they would feed you if you didn't have money and such. And I spoke English, and the guy just so happened that the guy in charge sort of had a bias or something, had a bad experience with Americans. And so he threw me out, so I'm stuck in this country without a passport, without money, and I couldn't even go, to where they have the soup kitchen and stuff. So I met a fellow on the streets, and he was a map thief, and he taught me, of how to steal maps out of libraries and stuff. So I did this some. I'm not proud of it and such, but I did it because I was sort of in survival at that time and such, and I did it. But I became fascinated a bit with maps and such, and the old look of paper, and I love old paper. That's something that came out of that, and I love the cartouches of maps, for example, and of the Dutch maps of the 17th century and such, and so I incorporated a little bit of this in my pictures. I use this imagery with the calendars, and it's a combination of these old maps and a little bit sometimes of pinball machines or slot machines from casinos. I love those colors and those images as well. And it's kind of a mesh between these different things. And I just, I saw them and I liked them. Pinball machines I saw as a child in the bars where my mom worked in Cincinnati and such. And I loved that look when I was a child, of a dark room with a lit up pinball machine. And the same for, slot machines.
Yeah, George, and now that you mentioned that, even looking at these numbers, you can definitely see the influence of the pinballs or slot machines and kind of these very graphic
Yeah,
numbers here.
it's
uh,
it's an analogy, like a pinball machine. You don't know. It's a game of chance, and like life's a game of chance too. We never know. You never know what's going
yeah.
to happen and such. So there's an element of chance. As much as you think that you're in control or something's not going to happen to you. I never thought some of the things, I never thought I was going to end up, stressed out like I was in the 1980s and stuff, but I did. It happened, and today I'm in a much better position. But things can happen in life, and stuff.
So George, I have a couple of questions for you here, and I'd love to open it up to more questions. So if you have them, you can put it in the chat box. And so I have a question from Larry, and he's wondering if you ever take inspiration from other calendar forms such as the Mayan or Egyptian or pagan calendars.
It's a good question. Primarily, no, but I have, in recent years, sort of read up a little bit of the Mayan. The Mayan, it's very fascinating what the Mayans did. And, it took them a lot of years to crack the Mayan codes and such. But I've looked at the Mayans just as a graphic. I love their graphics, but they saw them. They had this sort of religion about calendars, and it was a sort of a religious idea, almost a master of time, a master of these processes and such. And they so that's been a little bit fascinating to me to read about in recent years. But I have not directly, pulled something out of that, but I do love the imagery. I do love some of the imagery that they did. it's really fascinating to see it and such. But it's it was a brutal, violent history and such. And when the conquistadors came, in search of gold and all of this and everything, it was in that part of the world, it was rough,
Great.
yeah.
So Frank asked another question about your more recent work, and I think you touched a little bit upon like some of your, what you're thinking sort of moving forward. But he asks or says, you've recently done a number of self-portraits. What compelled you to undertake that series?
Um, Well, I just had this mental image of that came together of the different components, and I wanted to, you know, I was thinking about life. I'm getting older. Um, I've got a photo of me when I was young. I looked so different back then. I mean, that's a photo of me when I went in the service, and back then I could run a 5-minute mile, and today I run for a sandwich in the kitchen, But I'm getting older, and so I thought, I'd like to make a picture about my life in some way, some of my experiences and such. That because I was overseas and such, and in different circumstances and such, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun to do that, and I was sort of prospecting about how long I was going to live. In this particular picture, like, 88 years old, I'd probably not, but maybe, I'm being very optimistic. And then I have some that, where I'm not living so long. And I just thought I'd put in different parts of my life. And as the different parts came to me and such, and I'd put it within a structure, of dates and numbers that I like. And it feels very comfortable. Now, I'm going to do some drawings in the future that's going to be different and such. I'm doing some like black line drawings where it's I'm focusing more. If I draw from memory, it gives me some of the same feeling, that I do when I calculate, when I do dates and such. If I draw, I did a series of small drawings of parts of Asia. I've traveled through Asia, and the traffic in parts of the world is overwhelming to me, or something. And my wife's from Thailand. My wife has had a very interesting journey. She grew up in a small fishing village in Thailand, developing area and such. And so I've been over, in the third world, and the traffic and such is overwhelming at times. It's very different from the West. And so I was compelled to draw about this, and I did some small drawings, completely different from some of my other things. But it's the act of drawing from memory that and I included some dates, and people say, well, why are you putting dates with the traffic? Well, it's because the feeling of drawing these things from memory, of trying. I'm not able to draw, exactly from memory. I'm not that, like Stephen Wiltshire of England and stuff. I can't do that, but I draw my impression of it or something, this idea, this memory that I have and such, if something sticks in my head and stuff. So I did some drawings, some line drawings, and in black ink or charcoal and such. They're completely different and people may not like it, but, I don't care. I'm going to do what I like to do,
Yeah, George,
I
along
I love and respect, that people find my work interesting and stuff, and it's wonderful. But I still do, what I'm interested in and such. And I am part of a gallery now, and so things are different, in my life in that way and such. And it's been a fascinating journey to see these things and such. But I still follow my path and such.
George, along with that, and thinking of, we have a question here. We have a couple more questions. One is, I'm going to read it off here. Now that working with numbers has evolved from helping to ease your anxiety to an art practice as well, do you still think of the dating and numbering as comforting coping skill, or as an artistic inspiration, or both?
A little bit of both. My things are more organized, and I contemplate them. In the beginning, it was just coming out of me and such, and it wasn't with structure as much, but it was coming out, and then my ideas were formed out of that, that when it was coming out of me and such, and it was a feeling, it definitely was an activity that I was doing that calmed me down and such. As a child, dates calmed me down, drawing calmed me down, and they were positive things. And then, the circumstances that I was in my 20s, as they happened, it came to be that I went that way, that they relieved my anxiety and such, and that's where it came from, but I was able to find a certain pathway with it and such that turned into something that I never anticipated, and that's what happened.
Yeah. So George, I'm gonna, people are very curious about your artistic practice and your life as an artist. So Bella wonders, or says, "Hi George, you have such a lovely humor about the world, life. How have you been able to stay optimistic about the future in hard times like these? Has your work been affected lately by current events?"
Well, yes. I mean, it's a good question too. I have a little bit of soldier's humor, a little bit. I have a very good friend of mine, Daniel Lindner, Charleston. his name's Tucker, and Daniel, he was 18 years old, went off to Vietnam, and had rare life experiences in Vietnam. I was just in a little bit of combat with a car bomb in Germany, but Daniel saw a lot of fighting. He had to call in airstrikes on his own position several times, and they escaped and everything. But I've become friends with him. He lives a very simple life and such, and he's not angry, not bitter. He's had a difficult time and such, but he has a sense of humor sometimes about things, because the reality of the world is overwhelming for any of us. If you take it in too much, you got to kind of have a sense of humor about things. I think try to find, because the world's a very serious place, and it's not fair all the time. If you think it is, you need to go see parts of the world or other situations and such. And so you got. I mean, my opinion is you got to try to find a sense of humor or something about things. You can't let the very serious things overwhelm you. I approached the Titanic, I think that I was, from a distance, I think I was talking about some things, and it allowed me to talk about it from a distance I stayed away from the VA for a long time because I didn't want to go back, and I didn't want I didn't want, it just was stuff that I didn't want to address back then. But I think it was the Titanic was something in the back of my mind that, people are fascinated with the Titanic, the drama of it, the tragedy of it, and such. I sort of adopted the Titanic for different reasons, and that it became a cutout in a way for me to sort of think about certain things or something. Yeah, I mean, I know some war veterans, and they don't talk often about the hard times because it's too overwhelming. But they try to have a sense of humor about things because it's sort of a therapy, maybe, to deal with certain things.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, George. I know
Yeah.
that we have had conversations about, how much to share and all that sort of stuff, but thank you for sharing. We have a very conceptual question from Douglas, who says, "Hi, George. Dates are numbers, numbers are dates. Is there a difference to you as concepts and or artistic expressions? And if so, how?"
Well, my experience with numbers is specific. See the dates. Okay, I do these sequencing, and I do this process, and it's a thing I've done since I was a child. As a child, for example, walking to school, skipping to school, I would do the powers of two, and I would start with 1, 2, 4, 8, and I'd go up to 1048, 5, 7, 6, and it captured the same sort of feeling, I think it was always about I don't feel that with algebra, for example, or certain other things. I'm not a trained mathematician. I had the basic maths of an engineer, but I'm not a math expert, but I just had a certain skill, perhaps an innate ability with certain processes, and I think it has to do with inner sort of process and such. That I had there were a couple of people in my family that were classic autism. That one of them took machines apart, and he wasn't verbal and such, and he lived in the back in a small house and such, and they had to sort of take care of him. But he had a skill to take lawnmowers apart and clocks and such, and this was back in the 60s and early 70s and such, and it's an inner process and such. So I think that the numbers, just what I do with numbers is simply it's an inner process that I connect with. But I mean, yeah.
So we're coming up on towards the end of our time together. I want to make sure that we capture people's comments or questions. So we'll leave time for a couple of comments or questions, and you can type it in, or you can unmute yourself and ask George.
Should I go to the chat?
It's okay. I'll let you know if someone says
Oh,
something.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank
Paul, this is
everybody.
Victor. I have a question I'd like to put to George.
Go ahead, Vic.
George, are you hearing me? It's Victor.
Yes, I can hear you.
George, I'd like you to comment on something that, at least for me, was a very moving experience, and it might have been for you, and I'll just describe it very briefly, and you can talk about it. That George, and George is the date person, I'm not, but around 2000, George was in a home for, as a patient, a home, kind of a private, very high-end home for military people as a patient for maybe a year or so. Fast forward maybe 8 or 10 years, and it chokes me up even to say the story. George was invited back to be the guest of honor, and he was interviewed in a video. He donated some art to a big fundraiser in a black tie event, and he was the man of the hour for this organization for which he had been a patient 8 or 10 years earlier. And I was fortunate to go with George on that occasion in Boston.
Yes, I remember that, Victor. That was a New England Center for Homeless Veterans that I was at long before I had any contact with galleries and such. And I would stand there and would go to the Boston Public Library, and I did a lot of notebook things there and such. And they had an award where you know, that somebody had left a shelter and they'd gotten on their feet and such, and that's what happened, you know, in the years after and such. So they and I've supported them. I support different homeless causes, but I also support homeless veteran causes, and I gave back, you know, in that way and stuff. And they knew me. I was drawing there, and they knew me back then as I was doing stuff with my notebooks, but I was still secretive somewhat about it. But some of the guys would see me sitting at a table and they say, "What are you doing?" You know, and stuff. So it's a bit funny, you know.
George, thank you for that. So I have two questions, and this will be our last two questions. The first one will be from one of our teens. So at Intuit, we work with a cohort of teenagers to talk about outsider art, make art together, talk about self-taught artists. And Skylar asks, when making your works of art, do you follow a similar process for each one? And she's referring specifically on what you draw or paint first.
It's just a natural flow. Now, in recent years, I'm a lot more structured in my thinking and such, and I do come up with an idea, and then I follow it out. But it's all coming from that 1985 to 1988 period where I sort of created these pathways and such, and it's coming out of that. So I'm trying to present it in a structured way that other people could perhaps see some of the possibilities of what I'm doing or something like that. But my things are not they're not like like astrology or something. They are mathematical based. I mean, they are a counting process and such, and you can work your way through them, but it's you know, it's a bit like a watch. You got to spend some hours if you're gonna take a watch apart and see how it works and such, you know.
So
And you know, you ever heard of George Daniels, by the way? George Daniels is I love George Daniels. I see him as an artist. He was a self-taught watchmaker, passed away in like 2011, and he was just contrary to the watchmaking world. And he hated the quartz watch. He said the quartz watch is the battery is on a dedicated ambition to commit suicide. So in the late 1960s, he went on a mission to revive the old-fashioned mechanical watches, and he did. He created what's called a coaxial escapement in the 1970s, which improved Breguet's escapement, lever escapement, and it's a great story. I'm saving up. I'm going to buy me a nice quality watch and stuff. I've gotten old enough to do that.
Yeah.
So actually, George, someone in the chat had mentioned that there is a museum in Evanston that is about watches. The Halem Time Museum in Evanston that has lots of horological history. So if you're
Mm.
ever in Chicago, or if you come back to talk to us at Intuit, I think that we should take you there.
Yeah, I'm checking it out. I'm learning more about these things, and so it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Watchmaking is a mechanical art and such. You know, it's in order to George Daniels built watches built the entire watch. He built the case. He built everything, and using lathes and machines, and it's 32 different crafts that you have to master in order to build your own watch. I think the only thing that he did was a balanced spring, and that's a very highly sophisticated method that the metal has to be tempered, and he had that done. But other than that, he built the entire, and there's very, very few people in the world that can do that. But he was
Yeah.
one of them, and now his apprentice, Roger Smith, does that. And very fascinating stuff.
George, one last thing, which is actually something that I have sort of heard around or being said, especially around your Titanic pieces, and one of them that is at Intuit currently. But someone asks, is part of the origin of your interest in the Titanic because you share the name of one of the victims of the ship, George
Yes,
Widener?
I saw the passenger list as a teenager, and I saw my name on it, and it caught my interest even then and such. And then yeah, so it's true. I mean, but I do not know exactly my relationship to the famous Wideners of Philadelphia, but supposedly there's some connection to Philadelphia in my father's family and such. But yeah.
Okay. Douglas just, and I'll email you this, George. But there's a podcast called S Town that has a character who's a horologist. So Douglas just wanted to let you know that, and I'll share that with you in an email so you can refer to it later. But thank you
Thank
so
you.
much to everyone. Thank you to you, George, for being here with us and being so candid about your process and your history as an artist and as a human in the world. I encourage everyone to, if you are in Chicago, to come back and visit us at Intuit. We're opening again August 7th. If you are from another part of the country or the world, we will continue our online programming. We have Art After Work the third Thursday of the month, and then the last Wednesday of the month, we will be looking at one of George's works really, really closely for an art talk. So if you are a George fan, definitely check that out. But thank you so much, George. Any parting words?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'm not used to this, and so I'm not able to really type and say thank you to people that are saying thank you to me, but thank you to everybody for taking the time and listening to my story a bit, and thank you very much for that. Yes. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Have a good
everybody.
evening.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers. Cheers, everybody. See you.